A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Glad you're with me on the program today. We're going to be talking with Jim Wallace of the Gun Owners Action League in Massachusetts here in just a moment or two. Yeah, you know those old movies? You got the explorers, walking through the jungle, or maybe they're, hiking through the desert, and they stop and it's quiet. It's too quiet. That's kind of how I feel about the Massachusetts legislature right now. We've got this, remember, the House passed a bill that was named the Lawful Citizens Imprisonment Act by the Gun Owners Action League. And then the Senate objected to that legislation. They said, we're going to come up with one of our own. And they came up with a bill that wasn't great, but it was at least less bad. It was narrower in scope anyway, right? It didn't have any new gun-free zones or anything of that nature. The House and the Senate objected to this. They're these competing versions. So the bills go to a conference committee. That happened months ago. And since then, we really haven't even heard a peep from any of the lawmakers who are working behind the scenes on this bill. Now, again, we're less than 2 months away from the close of the session in Massachusetts. And as Jim Wallace says, he does expect to hear something before the end of the session in July. We'll get to that conversation in just 1 second. Before we do, however, let's talk about this for a moment. Economists warn that massive tax hikes could devastate your IRA and 401k account as the stock market braces for impact. With inflation on the rise, global uncertainty looming, it is clear why central banks and savvy Americans are turning to gold. If you have not had your eye on gold, time to make it a priority. Priority gold. Trust their team of proven professionals to help you diversify your savings with gold and silver. Call 1-800-405-GOLD or visit prioritygold.com/golden for a free gold info guide. Plus, see if you qualify for free shipping and storage. Experts agree that physical gold is one of the best ways to fortify your savings, no matter the economic climate. Act now to get your portfolio working for you while the market is golden. Call 1-800-405-GOLD to speak with a gold specialist or visit prioritygold.com/golden to learn more. That's 1-800-405-GOLD. And now let's turn our attention to GOLD, the Gun Owners Action League in Massachusetts. The executive director is Jim Wallace. He sat down with me earlier today to talk about the latest machinations on the gun control bill that is tied up in a conference committee and what gun owners need to be doing before this bill emerges in its final form. Take a look and a listen. Jim, thanks so much for joining me on the program, sir. It's good to see you again.
Welcome back to the Second Amendment battleground state.
Yes, indeed, and things are
a long time.
things are heating up, and not just temperature-wise. So I ran across this story yesterday from New Hampshire Public Radio. Massachusetts lawmakers' stack of unfinished business grows. As they write, there are fewer than 7 weeks left before lawmakers conclude business on July 31st. Lawmakers have already sent a conference committee a budget, a gun law reform, federal matching funds, and wage transparency matters. And now we've heard that the Massachusetts Senate is going to release a climate bill into the mix. So since we've got less than 7 weeks left in the session, ostensibly, let me ask, what are you hearing about the conference committee that is working on a gun bill? Because it seems like there's been radio silence for months now.
It has been, and I'm really okay with that. I hope they fall asleep and July 31st comes and goes. I would consider that a win. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. But it's one of the things people need to know is Massachusetts has a 2-year legislative session, really a year and a half, but they call it a 2-year. And it ends on the second year on July 31st. You will see more legislation passed in the last 72 hours of that session, triple of what you have seen in the last year and a half. Because what they do is the Senate president and the speaker will have all these projects sitting there. And towards the end of the session, that's when they start to wheel and deal. All right, you want your thing, I want my thing. How can we do this? You give me this, I'll give you that, whatever the pet project might be. And that also happens during the conference committee for the state budget, which is underway right now. So that is also a danger ground because they will start to wheel and deal. Well, you want this in a budget, I want this in a budget. Okay, I'll move this bill for you, you move that one for me. And That's the way the system works. And so we're kind of, I'm not going to say we're sitting in neutral because we're always working, trying to figure out what's going on in the building, but things are silent. You hear little dribs and drabs here. The Chairman Day, who's the so-called architect behind this thing, but we all know he didn't write it. And, he's trying to be very forceful because the word is on the street in the State House that this is his debut, or if you want to call it audition, because he wants to be chair of Ways and Means next year. So if he doesn't bring this home, then that could be in jeopardy for him, and he does not want that to happen. Now, on the other side, the Senate, this does not seem to be very important to the Senate. Even though their bill was very bad, it was tremendously less bad than the House bill, and it's not really a priority for the Senate. So we'll have to see what happens. So the 6 people, 3 senators, 3 reps are still supposedly meeting in private and secret, and we're not allowed to know what they're talking about or what's going on. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, and I think it was either the last time you were on the show or maybe it was the appearance before that. We were talking about your piece at gold.org, Process Matters. And,
Yes.
I thought about that as I read this story yesterday, because I think you're right. We are, 7 weeks isn't a lot of time, but it's plenty of time for them to come up with something, rush it out through the conference committee. And again, there's not going to be committee hearings afterwards. There will be no public hearings afterwards. There'll be a straight up or down vote in the Senate and in the House. And yet you think back, it was almost a year ago, Jim, that we started talking about the Lawful Citizens Imprisonment Act, the House bill, right? And again, there was this rush in the House to get this done before, I think the first deadline was, what was it? Was early August, and then they kind of pushed it back to September. But there was, we got to get this done now. We don't have time for all these hearings. We got to play these games. We got to play these legislative tricks. Well, here we are again, almost a year later. No bill has had a vote on the floor. So what was the reason for the rush, if not to get the public out of the way so that they could not play a role in what this bill looks like?
That was absolutely the case, because they were hoping to pass it before. What was Nancy Pelosi? Well, we have to pass it to find out what's in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what this whole process, or lack thereof, was about. Let's get this thing to the governor's desk before the general public even knows what's in this bill. And as you know, the hearing process was a sham. They supposedly had, and I was there, they had a Ways and Means hearing. But as soon as they opened the hearing, the Ways and Means chair handed it over to Michael Day, who was chair of Judiciary, and yada, 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 yada. It went on. And, Mike Harris, our public policy guy, he was a State House aide for a dozen years. And I've been doing this 25 years. Neither one of us had seen anything like this entire so-called process. When the original bill actually went to the House floor for a so-called debate, it was the first time in my career I've seen a bill change numbers 3 times while in debate, because they pulled a swift one to get it on the floor by releasing it as a Ways and Means bill, which is a budget bill, which is, a money bill. And they stripped all of the money out of what they released and just released the gun part. But they kind of messed up, because there are special rules for money bills that both Democrats and Republicans said on the House floor, you can't do what you're trying to do. And suddenly it was changed to House 4139-2. Never heard of a -2 on a bill, so so suddenly, in a blink of an eye, it was no longer a money bill and the rules did not apply. So it's been that way, gosh, for a year, maybe more. And there is no process. There has not been any process on this. So here we are with this mess of 2 entirely different bills, that none of which is good. As a matter of fact, I had a couple of State House aides, Jim, can you let us know, because we really haven't heard from you on these things. And I'm like, you haven't heard from us? Are you sitting there telling me you haven't heard our opinion on these bills? Are you kidding me? Remember your phones were almost shut down last year because of the opinions on this bill? But they said, well, yeah, but you haven't formally written a letter to the conference committee telling us what parts you like. Well, that should answer your question right there. You know? Like,
the silence speaks volumes.
Yeah, where's a piece of blank paper I can send you? You know, it's like, oh my God. So, yeah, there's a lot going on, of course, in Mass, like other places too. There's so many other things in play, like, you know, the illegal immigrants situation, and don't get me wrong, I'm pro legal immigration because I love the food, but you know, the governor just asked for another $1 billion to house and feed the illegal immigrant population in Massachusetts. So there's that. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. Hospitals are going bankrupt in Massachusetts. So there's a lot in play as we get to the end of this session. But this will certainly be, you know, it's one of the worst attacks on civil rights, period, that we've seen in a long time. And you and I both knew when Bruin happened, and all of our friends in the 2A community said, it's over, we win. No, now it just begins. And I keep comparing this to Brown v. Board of Education years ago. That was just the beginning of the fight. Yeah. That was not the end of the fight. And just like Bruin, no, that was the beginning. But we also both know that Bruin really only affected, what, 5 or 6 states?
8, I think, yeah.
Yeah, something like that, you know, because the rest of the country, as long as you're a lawful citizen, we don't care what you do.
Right.
It's like the bump stock thing now. Why do you care?
So I'm glad you brought up the bump stock, man, because I was gonna talk about this. You just posted something at Goal. Massachusetts has banned bump stocks at the state level, but again, in a sign of just how screwy things are in Massachusetts, while the legislature banned bump stocks, you won't find that ban in statute. Is that right, Jim?
It's kind of strange because when SCOTUS ruled, you know, on the ATF bump stock garbage, everybody, of course, is clamoring, you know, well, what does that do for us here? And, you know, it's been since 2017 and we don't talk about bump stocks much. And it's like, well, you know what, let me relook at everything, you know, and we'll get back to you. Well, I kept going through the law and I'm like, okay, bump stock appears as a separate definition in our definition section of law.
Mm-hmm.
It also is included in the definition of machine gun, which, you know, that might play with SCOTUS's decision, who knows? And it's like, okay, but where's the ban? And it's mentioned in the license to carry law, but just barely. But it doesn't, it just says bump stock shall not be included in these 2, I guess, subparagraphs. And those 2 subparagraphs, by the way, are the machine gun licensing. So even though they put bump stocks in the definition of machine gun, you can't have a bump stock if you have a machine gun license. So it's like, are you serious, folks? Who wrote this stuff? But still the ban wasn't there. And I'm like, I know it's there because I was, you know, fighting this thing. So I went back to the original bill that passed, which is Chapter 110 of the Acts of 2017, and I'm scrolling through because that wasn't a gun bill. It was a budget bill or something like that.
Okay.
So you have to really look for the sections under bump stock. So anyways, I think it's section 53 of the bill. That's where the ban is. But it was never put into the enumerated laws. So it's a law, but it's not in the laws.
but even though, okay, so it's a law that's not in the laws, but if you violate that law, you're going to prison. You can still face prosecution, right? Yeah. They, you know, and I remember years ago, Jim, you telling me that the gun laws in Massachusetts were so bad, so vague, and so numerous that if you called the Attorney General's office as a gun owner and said, hey, I need help, can you explain this to me? Is this allowed? that they would tell you, we don't give legal advice. You're on your own here, because even the AG didn't want to wade into trying to decipher state law. I mean, and this is another perfect example of this. The dangers that gun owners face just trying to exercise a right in Massachusetts. It's not just that the state has all of these laws in place. It's that you don't know what laws are in place. It is incredibly difficult to find out what you are able to do under Massachusetts law.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting in the fact that it's been 25 years or thereabouts since the 1998 laws were passed. And we still have debates all the time, internally and externally, over what something means or doesn't mean. Because you'll find a section of law and go, oh, that explains it. But what you don't know is there's probably 2 or 3 other sections of law that refer to that section of law. So it's extraordinarily complicated. And, this is going back pre-COVID, but there was a chief of staff for the Executive Office of Public Safety. His name was David. And he and I would meet every once in a while. And he was right up front. He said, Jim, if I had my way, I'd collect every gun in the country and throw them in the ocean. But we have a Second Amendment. We have gun laws, and we should be able to explain those gun laws to the citizens. And the fact that we can't is just an abomination, and it's unfair. So the very state that passed the laws, it's like our licensing laws that we've been fighting forever, where my license says Commonwealth of Massachusetts on it. But under the law, the chiefs of police are the issuing authority. So the state continues to maintain, after all these years, it is not a state license. It's a town license. Wait a minute, it says Commonwealth of Mass right on it. Yes, but they're issued by the town. So we have no authority over what the town does and doesn't do, even if they're violating the law. Huh? How can that be? And it's like, wait a minute. So you designed a system that you have no authority over and can just walk away anytime something goes wrong because, no, we're just the people who keep the database and, print out the cards, but the chiefs are responsible and try to sue a chief. It's like, one of our attorneys calls it whack-a-mole. You sue a chief, okay, that person gets a license. Sue a chief, that person gets a license, but the system never gets fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's been a run. I'll tell you what. And even the chair of the Gun Control Advisory Board, he's a retired police chief, and he trains law enforcement on the gun laws in Mass. And it's an 8-hour class. It's an 8-hour class to train law enforcement. The gun laws are actually so bad because we have a class we call Mass Gun Law for Citizen. We don't cover the criminal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We just cover all the stuff a citizen needs to know. And it's so bad that a number of years ago, our trainer, John Green, took his son to a hunter education course. And the game warden, we call environmental police officers because it's Massachusetts, was teaching the laws. And John, nice guy, he's just sitting there. And he says, Jimmy, almost everything that guy said was wrong. So we ended up having a meeting with the higher ups of the warden service. And we now train all of their new recruits on mass gun law. How sad is that?
Oh, wow. That is sad. Be great if you were in charge of writing the laws instead of just, training folks as to what the laws are. But that is not the case, unfortunately. Oh. What is your advice for Massachusetts gun owners right now? Again, we do expect that there's going to be something taking place in the next 7 weeks. So what should gun owners be doing while we're waiting for the other shoe to drop here?
They, where it's almost, it is summertime, try to find your legislators, whether it's a senator or state rep. They're usually going to have events somewhere, even if it's a fundraiser, whatever, chicken barbecue, go and talk to them about your concerns about any of this potential language coming out and how it's going to affect people. And the fact that there's nothing in there that's going to affect crime, nothing, period. Yeah. And then just be ready because probably sometime in July, this thing's going to hit the floor running.
All right.
We're going to have to be to fight. So once again.
Well, we will be in constant contact with you. And when we start to see some movement here, I'd love to have you back on the program so we can talk about just how egregiously awful this bill actually is. And just a reminder for folks, the House bill really, I mean, it was everything. It was, sensitive places. It was gun-free zones. It was, changes to the licensing standard. The Senate bill, as Jim says, was bad, but it was more narrow in its scope. The House bill was very, very expansive, and we don't know what the conference committee bill is going to look like. It could look closer to the House version. It could look closer to the Senate version. Either way, it's not going to be good news for gun owners. The question is, again, just how awful is this going to be? Jim Wallace, as always, man, thank you so much for everything you're doing up there in Massachusetts. I appreciate you joining me on the program today, and I look forward to talking again very soon.
All right. Talk to you soon.
My thanks to Jim for joining us on the program. We will definitely be keeping a close eye on what's going on in Boston. And yeah, when there is news to announce, we will bring it to you here at Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Right now, let's talk about today's armed citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about this for just 1 second. At the very heart of our democracy lies a principle that we hold sacred: free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations that are crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where Wealth Protection Research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech, committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Now, Wealth Protection Research seeks out financial experts, the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 election wealth protection report that highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't touch. Listeners can get it absolutely free. Just text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. Text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 election protection report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment doesn't think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. Text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy. All right, turning now to our recidivist report. We mentioned this yesterday when we were talking with Eric Delbert from LEPD Farms and Range in Ohio. All of the things that go into a functional criminal justice system, Democrats, they love to talk about, well, we'll just put another law in the books. But again, those laws, even if you agree with the laws, they have to be enforced. If you don't agree with the laws, obviously that's a different question. But it still takes a functional court system, right? Putting a law on the books doesn't really change anything. If that law is not used, if prosecutors aren't charging people, if there aren't convictions, then what is the point, right? And sadly, while things are getting back to normal from where they were 4 years ago, I mean, let's face it, our court system was semi-functional at best pre-COVID. Now, it's not great. There was this incident in Maine over the weekend, Auburn, Maine, where a guy who was, I believe, on probation for domestic violence, serious domestic violence over a decade ago, had a order of protection taken out against him more recently, tried to contact the woman, and then when he was unable to gain entry to her home, a couple of fires were set. The body was found in one of the homes. He eventually was shot and killed by police. And there were questions, as we talked about in yesterday's program, about why this guy was out. The Fraternal Order of Police in Maine blasting the judge for releasing this guy, on $1,500 bond 2 weeks after he was arrested. But the judge, apparently in her decision, cited the Sixth Amendment, saying that this guy had not been able to find representation, and so she had no other choice but to release him. I said yesterday at the time, I thought 2 weeks. I listen, I'm a civil rights defender. I like all of our rights, including our right to counsel. And if we can't afford one, well, that's when we get a public defender, right? 2 weeks, I think, is a really short window before you let somebody loose. But the other extreme is that you've had people sitting in jail for over a year who have yet to go to trial because, again, they don't have representation. And at that point, somewhere between 2 weeks and let's say 12 months, I think our rights are implicated here. I bring this up because there is a story out of Maine today. Shortage of public defenders in Maine allowed the release of man who caused fiery standoff. So that is the excuse that is being used here. That this guy would have been kept behind bars, presumably, possibly, if there were more public defenders operating in the state of Maine. This is from the Associated Press. They report that Maine shortage of public defenders allowed a man with a violent criminal history to be released on bail 3 days before he went to his former girlfriend's home in Auburn, where another man was killed before an hours-long standoff with police in which shots were exchanged, 2 houses burned to the ground, and the assailant was eventually killed by the tactical team. Leon Hinckley posted bail on June the 12th after a judge cited delays in finding a court-appointed attorney for removing a probation hold on Hinckley, lowering his bail to $1,500. His release, the Associated Press says, angered law enforcement officials and the district attorney, who said that public safety should outweigh delays in obtaining counsel for a man with a history of violent crimes. District Attorney Neil McLean Jr. said on Monday, "We recognize that the state needs to fix the lawyer issue, but public safety should not be compromised." That is a compelling argument, right? But again, what if we're using that in let's say, a gun control standpoint? Well, we recognize that the state needs to respect the Second Amendment, but public safety shouldn't be compromised by the sale and possession of these so-called assault weapons or large-capacity magazines, or being able to buy more than one gun a month, being able to buy a gun without having to wait 72 hours to take possession of it, or any other gun control law that you can think of. The state does have an obligation to provide for counsel for defendants who cannot afford an attorney. And if the state is not meeting that obligation, then yes, there will be incidents like this. Now, again, I think 2 weeks is a really short window. But what happens if this is 2 months or 4 months or 8 months? At what point would the district attorney say that, we might have to compromise public safety because otherwise we're violating somebody's rights? In this case, again, I think the case can be made that Hinckley should have been kept behind bars for at least a little while longer until a court-appointed attorney was found. He had previously served a 15-year sentence for repeatedly stabbing his domestic partner, as well as a bystander who intervened. He was in custody for accused of choking his current girlfriend. When he went before a judge on May 24th, District Judge Sarah Churchill originally set bail at $25,000, but then removed a probation hold and lowered that bail amount after Hinckley had spent 2.5 weeks in jail without an attorney. The Associated Press says on Monday the court system took a rare step of issuing a statement defending the judge after criticism from the DA and the Fraternal Order of Police and the Maine State Troopers Association. Chief Justice Valerie Stanfill said the state's court system will continue to, quote, malfunction until the state addresses the shortage of lawyers who are willing to represent defendants who are unable to pay for an attorney. She said, quote, "The lack of appointed counsel in the state is a constitutional crisis. As a result, every day, judges must make extraordinarily difficult decisions, balancing the constitutional rights of the accused with the needs of the public." The Associated Press goes on to say that 2 years ago, the ACLU sued Maine over the state system for providing lawyers for indigent clients that historically rely on private attorneys who are reimbursed by the state. There was a report that was released in 2019 that the AP said outlined, quote, significant shortcomings in Maine's system, including lax oversight of the billing practices by the private attorneys. So in some states, you've actually got like a public defender's office. And again, those public defenders may be overworked, right? They may have a caseload that is double or triple what it should be. But there's at least a pool of attorneys there who are paid by the state. They are state employees, and that's what they do. They represent defendants who cannot afford an attorney otherwise. Other states like Maine basically reimburse attorneys for serving as public defenders. So, you're in private practice, but you're also in that sort of, pool of potential individuals who are available. The problem is that pool is awfully shallow in Maine. The Associated Press reports that the state is trying to create a formal public defender system with several taxpayer-funded offices across the state. But they say it'll take time to address the backlog that the ACLU Maine describes as hundreds of defendants, some of whom have waited weeks or months for an attorney. And again, in other states, I've seen incidents where charges have been dismissed after more than a year of somebody waiting for an attorney. So this is an issue. And it's not one I think that, again, is necessarily at the heart of the judge's decision to lower this man's bond and to end the probation hold. That might have been the excuse this time around. But again, I think 2 weeks is an awfully short window. But it is a significant problem. It is something that needs to be addressed. And by the way, it's not really something that came up during the legislative session in Maine this year, is it? Instead, again, there was talk of a red flag law to replace the state's yellow flag law. They ended up passing a 72-hour waiting period for all firearm transfers. They imposed new restrictions requiring background checks on all advertised gun sales. They didn't talk about the nuts and bolts, of the criminal justice system. A functional criminal justice system that does include, again, a right to counsel for those accused of a crime. Democrats, they wanted to do the shiny, they were pursuing the bright, shiny object, right? They were going after gun control. But again, it doesn't matter how many gun laws you put on the books if defendants are walking because there are no attorneys to represent them. So you would think that even gun control fans, you would think maybe more than anybody, gun control fans would be in favor of a functional criminal justice system that includes public defenders. But no, not really. You know, as we've seen in Colorado this past session, where I think 8 gun control bills were signed into law, Democrats were loath to actually include penalties for violating these laws, right? The proposed ban on so-called assault weapons that did not pass originally did not come with any jail time or any prison time. If you violated the law, it was a $250,000 fine. Democrats in Colorado rejected bills that would have increased the penalty for stealing a firearm. They rejected bills that would have increased the penalty for engaging in sex trafficking. Right? They're not. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but I think it is fair to say that many Democrats seem to be much more in favor of putting laws on the books than in seeing that laws are actually enforced. And from my perspective, if you're going to put unconstitutional laws on the books, I'm okay with them not being enforced, but a better approach would be to keep those unconstitutional statutes off the books in the first place and maybe focus again on violent offenders, since we apparently have a problem with those violent offenders and those accused of violent crimes being released from custody because we don't have enough attorneys to go around to represent them. All right, on to today's armed citizen story from Shreveport, Louisiana, where a random attack in a Shreveport Walmart apparently led to shots being fired. 2 individuals didn't know each other, but it didn't stop one of them from attacking the other. This was about 10:45 on June 14th. Officers dispatched in Shreveport to report on shots fired inside a Walmart. When they got there, officers were flagged down and detained ultimately 2 individuals who were involved in the incident. According to KEEL radio, after a thorough investigation, officers determined that 31-year-old Devontae Palmer initiated the attack, randomly assaulting his victim. During the attack, the victim then produced a legally possessed handgun in an attempt to defend himself. At that point, Palmer actually grabbed the pistol, which caused a single round to be fired. The victim then produced a knife, always good to have a backup option, right? And was able to cut Palmer across the arm in order to have him release the gun and stop the attack. Multiple witnesses provided consistent accounts of the incident, corroborating the victim's statements. The investigation revealed that, again, the 2 men did not know each other. The attack appeared to be completely random. We seem to be having more of those random attacks recently, right? There was the 3-year-old who was stabbed at a grocery store in Ohio. Mom was stabbed. 3-year-old was killed. That, too, a random attack. Woman stealing a knife from a thrift store, then walking over to the grocery store and deciding who her target was going to be. This may have been similar to that attack in Ohio. Palmer has been charged with 1 count of simple battery. The victim in this case not facing charges at all because they were acting in self-defense. And, you know, again, we talk about carrying a firearm for self-defense, but it is a good thing this guy had a backup in the form of a knife, because otherwise Palmer could have gotten a hold of that pistol and done some serious damage. All right, finally, today's good deed of the day: in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. A neighbor coming to the aid of a family in need in Duluth, Minnesota, saving 3 individuals as well as a house from going up in flames. According to the Duluth Fire Department, the flames started at a house about 12:12 Tuesday morning, so just after midnight. When crews arrived, they discovered the front steps and the porch were engulfed in flames, and they were able to determine that the 3 residents had already managed to escape. Apparently, a neighbor had discovered the fire, called 911, and then took the time to make sure that his neighbors were okay, alerting the occupants. The fire department said this was a factor in the damage not being greater. So, again, just after midnight, folks are asleep. If the neighbor didn't see the flames, didn't call in the report of the fire, first responders would not have arrived there as quickly as they did. The damage would have been far greater. And again, lives may have been lost. So we don't know the name of this anonymous stranger, but again, very much in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing to save a family in need. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program as always. Look forward to being back with you again tomorrow. I believe, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I believe we're going to be talking with Pete Brownell of Brownell, celebrating 85 years in business, which is it's pretty extraordinary when any business survives for that long, but particularly one in an industry that has seen so many changes over the previous 8 decades. So we'll hopefully talk with Pete Brownell on tomorrow's Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Later in the week, Pete Forcelli, and we might just have the adventures of Pete and Pete here on Cam & Company this week. Pete Forcelli is going to be with us, retired ATF Assistant Director. We've had Pete on the program, a number of times. He was one of the whistleblowers in Operation Fast and Furious. And I wanted to get Pete on the program right after Mexico held its elections, and was it Claudia Sheinbaum was elected president, basically to continue the current policies of Obrador, including the lawsuits against U.S. gun makers and gun sellers. But Pete was unavailable when the election took place. We've got Pete coming back on Thursday. Probably be talking a little bit about Mexico. Probably talk about the bump stock ban and some of the other ATF rules that are now certainly in the crosshairs of the courts. But to look for that conversation later in the week. In the meantime, don't forget to check out bearingarms.com throughout the day. We're keeping you up to date on all of the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. And if you like what you see, I would encourage you to become a VIP or VIP Gold member. Just use the promo code SAVEAMERICA and you can get 50% off of your VIP or VIP Gold membership. You'll get exclusive content, an ad-free experience, the ability to comment on stories. But you will also be supporting the independent pro-Second Amendment journalism that we are doing at Bearing Arms. And in this day and age of big tech censorship and rampant media bias, I'm about to sit down and write a story about the New York Times media bias. Your support, it is so important. So thank you again. And make sure you use that promo code SAVEAMERICA if you are not yet a VIP or VIP Gold member. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Until then, have a great 2A Tuesday. Be safe. Be well. And be free.